Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you part 2 of my November wrap-up. In the month of November I read 32 books because I did a 30 books in 30 days challenge, and I'm here to give you the second half of the books that I've read, and I'll leave a link down below to part 1. In this one I'm going to be talking about all the non-fiction, middle grade, picture books and anything else that I read this month. And I'll have content warnings and triggers in the description box down below if that could be useful to you, but without further ado, let's get right down to the books that I read in November. So we are going to start on a high here. I'm going to talk about a new favourite, a 5-star read, and for me that is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Gottlieb. This is her non-fiction memoir book where she talks about the fact that she's a therapist, how she became a therapist, what it's like to be a therapist, what therapy is like. And she also talks about some case studies of 3 patients that she's worked with and how they have developed during their experiences with therapy, and shows kind of the different reasons why, but also the different experiences that people have with therapy. But as well as that, while she goes through this book, she kind of has an awful breakup and realizes that she herself could do with some therapy, and then she starts to psychoanalyze her experience being on the other side of the therapist's chair. Now this was just brilliant. To me it was brilliant. As someone who has never gone through therapy myself and who finds it to be a bit of a scary concept, it was really nice because it made the idea of therapy seem a bit more approachable. It did a lot of myth busting. It kind of talked about what it's really like to be in therapy and kind of gives you a bit of what to expect, how to find what a good therapist for you looks like and what that relationship may be. And I found all of that fascinating, as well as just hearing a bit of behind the scenes of what's really going through a therapist's mind while they're sitting behind a chair listening to you talk about things, and also just talking about human psychology and the ways in which we show certain patterns, but also in the ways in which we are all very different. This book did such a good job of highlighting the human element to this story, because we see her as a therapist from all points of view, from the point of view where she needs it herself, where she is supportive to other people in their difficult times, and what she's like as an adult outside of her profession. And it humanizes the concept of a therapist, which I think we don't see that often in media. But as well as that, it also humanized some of the people that we meet that she works with, who at first we might think is just a horrible person, but then we understand the layers to them, the complexities and what they're carrying and dealing with. And I just appreciated how she humanized each of the patients that we get to follow with this book, so much to the extent that by the end of the book I was actually feeling quite emotional, having gone on these journeys with different people and seeing how they've blossomed and grown after their therapy experience. It was emotional to me reading it. I have no idea how much more emotional it must be for each of those people in particular. I think it was written really, really well. Gottlieb knows how to tell a story. Sometimes you get those non-fiction books where you're just like, this is a very interesting concept, but they don't know how to write the story. Not the case here. It's incredibly, incredibly well written, and I just felt such an affinity for it. And it's one of these books that I was reading it and I was telling everyone anecdotes and things and facts that I'd learned from reading this book, and I've recommended it to so many people already, and it's only been 1 month since I've read it. I will not hesitate to say that I feel like I've become a better person from having read this book. I feel like I'm better able to understand the people around me and face conflicts and understand a bit of why they are acting the way that they're acting in this conflict. So I do think it's one of those books that everyone should read, and I do think it's really changed me. So this was a 5-star easily. The next non-fiction book that I read is Things My Son Needs to Know About the World by Fredrik Backman. I've read Fredrik Backman's fiction before and really enjoyed it, but this is a little collection of essays and tidbits of things that he would want to tell his son about the world as an adult. Now this book is not for me. Like, I'm not the target audience. There are dad jokes in this. There's clearly a lot of dad to son pipeline humor that I just did not connect with. I just did not get. There was a whole chapter about poop, and I'm sure all the new parents are going to be like, yes, poop, it's everywhere all of the time, and they're going to find all of those little tidbits about poop and like how it's an analogy for life really entertaining, or things about like going to IKEA as a new parent entertaining, because those are experiences that they have had. I'm not a new parent. I'm not going to be a new parent anytime soon. What am I doing reading this book? Just having a good time. And I did have a good time. when I saw past the humour that I couldn't connect to, you just get to kind of get a semblance and a sense of who Fredrik Backman is as a man. And I can just tell you from the get-go, he is a man who loves his wife, and that love for his wife shines through every single one of these essays, and it was absolutely adorable and beautiful to see in the writing, because actually he's talking about writing to his son, but his relationship with his wife is so clearly on the page, and that's the thing that shone through the most for me, and I found that really sweet and sincere. But also it's really nice to just see how he really cares about his newborn son, and of course through following him on social media and such, I know he's got a bigger family now and more time has passed since this book, but that last chapter packed a punch. He's been through a lot, things that I didn't know. Overall, I'm glad I read this. But the next thing I also did was recommend it immediately to like my brother-in-law, who is a new father to a son. So there's definitely a target audience for this, but don't worry if you don't particularly fit that audience, it's still a good enough read. I read 2 books in a series, so this is book 2 and book 3 in the Track series by Jason Reynolds, and it's a middle grade series. The second book in the series is Patina, which is the one I'm going to start with. They stand alone in a way, so you could read these as standalones, but you could also read them in order, so I can tell you what this one is about without spoiling anything from the first book in the series. So this is Patina, it's following her. She is someone who runs solo all the time, but for the first time she's learning to run relay, which means she has to learn to be part of a team and accept that winning is not entirely dependent on you. Patina is a young child who is very used to taking on a lot of responsibility. Her father has passed away and she's grieving her father, but also her mother had to have surgery where she lost some of her limbs because of it, and is now a disabled mother who can't physically care for her children, even though she emotionally cares for them a lot. And so Patina and her sister are now living with her godparents. And so there's a lot. Patina feels a lot of protection and care for her disabled mother. She feels a lot of responsibility and care for her youngest sibling. She's also now going to a new school for the first time, and she's just dealing with a lot of change, a lot of movement, and she's also changing the ways in which she runs and participates in the track team. And this just, it got me in those emotions, it got me in those feels. What I particularly love about this book is that it manages to show all the threads of relationships. It shows a found family. The track team in this series has always been a found family from the first book. Patina is the kind of character where you might argue she doesn't need a found family, because she's got a mother that cares for her, she's got godparents who cares for her, she's got a sister who cares for her, but you still get to see how she benefits from having that friendship, from having that found family there, and I loved that. I also loved the fact that you saw such a genuine and sweet and lovely sibling relationship between 2 children who have a little bit of an age gap but still just really love and care for each other. That was adorable. I could relate to Patina as a young child, feeling like she took a lot of care on, especially if she had a disabled family member. I think that representation or depiction was done really realistically, and I loved the whole concept of her having to learn how to be part of a team in relay and how she had to kind of adjust her expectations for that. The book ended in the perfect place. I just loved where it decided to stop the story. I think it gives you a good, accurate depiction of what the messages and the story of the book is really all about. I loved Patina as a character. I loved seeing her find a way to overcome some of the prejudices that she has while she attends her new school. There was just so much in this book to love, and so I gave this one 5 stars, and it became a new favourite. Because I had such a good time with it, I decided I immediately had to continue on and read the 3rd book in the series. It's not the last one, there's still one more, and that's Sunny by Jason Reynolds as well. Sunny, as a secondary character in the previous books, was definitely my favourite character, but unfortunately I really didn't get along with this book. I really didn't like it, and so now Patina is my favourite character in the series. Why did this one fall so flat? This is the shortest book, and arguably it's dealing with the biggest themes. We're following Sunny. Sunny runs long distance. He's amazing at it. He always wins. He never loses, and he hates it. He doesn't enjoy running long distance. He does it because his father makes him, and he does it to honour his dead mother. So there's a lot of pain in the reasons why he does the things that he does. He also is someone who, his mother died during childbirth, so we never got to really know his mother very closely, and it means occasions like his birthday are not occasions for celebration. There's a whole lack of communication happening between his father and him, and the only way they seem to be able to bond is when he's running long distance, but Sonny doesn't want to do that anymore. He doesn't enjoy it. So that's what this book is largely about, and you can already see the themes of grief, the themes of communication, the themes of healing that are going to be part and parcel of this book, and that is all lovely. And I probably would have adored this book. Sonny's such a great character. Probably would have adored this book and adored the experience if it was written in prose like the other books of the series are. Or why did Jason Reynolds choose to write this in a diary format? I do not understand. By writing this in diary format, it removes us from all of the emotional build-up and all of the emotional impact, because everything is told to us in hindsight. It's already happened in the past, and Sonny is writing his diary after it happens, so all of those emotional beats and moments, we are just not present with the character in those moments, and it took it away from me. Sonny is also a weird child. He likes funny sounds, he likes funny moments and anecdotes, and so his diary is very much random and onomatopoeic, and it's very fun and weird and quirky, and I think for a lot of children it's going to be fun and weird and quirky to read that, but for me the tone of the fun and quirkiness just didn't quite balance the emotional intensity that this book was going through, and I think some of those jokes could have been better translated if it was written in prose instead, and so the writing style and the way it was chosen to be written really curbed the emotional impact for me. It really curbed my enjoyment of the characters and the events of the book, and it just made the whole thing fall flat. I did not like this book. It's not one in the series I can see myself rereading. I will still read the last one because if it switches back to prose I'll be happy, but I was so disappointed in the fact that this was such a big miss for me. Then I read two plays which were in this bind up. They are both by Arthur Miller. I first read A View from the Bridge. This one is following this family. They're an American family, an uncle and aunt who live with their niece, and they take in some refugees who are illegal refugees, and one of the illegal refugees shows interest in that niece, but the uncle is really unhappy and believes that the refugee is interested in his niece just for a green card. So tensions rise within this small house where two members of the extended family are a secret. And Arthur Miller plays just don't disappoint. I absolutely loved A View from the Bridge. I gave it 5 stars, and it also became a new favourite. I just found it fascinating seeing those rising tensions build just bit by bit by bit. It's leading to a bubbling, boiling point, and when it got to that boiling point it was very, very intense. There are themes of toxic masculinity in this. A lot of that is largely focused on that, and how this uncle does not and cannot see this niece as a grown woman. I think that's something a lot of men struggle with and need to get over very quickly, because women can make their own choices. So I appreciated this perspective on toxic masculinity, but also it did a very good job of showing that commentary on what it's like to be a refugee, how you're at mercy of some people, the judgment that people will put on you just for you being yourself, and I think it handled that quite well for a play that's fairly short. It did the setting well. You got to meet outside characters to see their opinions, but I never felt flooded with too many characters or moving pieces. And it's largely set within the home. You get to see people leaving and coming in, but you're always in the home. You're always in this small enclosed space where there are few too many people living at once, and there is no semblance of privacy, and it worked wonders for the play. I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. I also then read All My Sons, which was part of this, and this is quite a different play, I would say. In All My Sons, you're following this family who are post-war, so the war has happened, and one of their sons has gone missing in action. He hasn't returned, and the other son is now back, and he's like, I want to marry the woman who is going to be marrying my brother. I've fallen for her, it's been 3 years, it's time we all move on and accept that he's probably dead and he's not going to be found. But the parents are having a much harder time of getting to that point. There's also another story thread to it, which I'm not going to say because it's more fun for you if you figure that out yourself. I wouldn't know if it's fun, but it's more entertaining if you figure that out for yourself. What I liked about this one is how it kind of talked about the missing child element. At what point do you stop grieving? At what point do you stop looking and let yourself grieve and then move on? When do you draw that line? it's impossible to say as someone who's never had someone who's gone missing, but it's just such an intense emotional period for the mother, for the father, for the brother, and the added complication of wanting to be with the girl who was going to be with his brother. It's layers to the story, and it unpacks the emotional intensity of that within this play very, very well. It also does a very good job of, there's a lot of men in that play, there's a lot of men, there's a lot of anger and trust and loyalty and betrayal and masculinity, again, feeding into this play. And it was just fascinating to see how all of these men within this dysfunctional family kind of had to work through their own ignorance, I would say. And a lot of this thematically is focused on ignorance. You can see that Arthur Miller is really pushing the words ignorance and ignoramus throughout the beginning of the play, and I liked it. I liked how it was talking about what we're aware of, whether we trust things too easily, what fact checking are we doing. And so I think both of these plays were fascinating. They're ones I would sit through a university class studying, and Arthur Miller does not miss. Non-fiction time again. I read Disobedient Bodies by Emma Dabiri. This is kind of an extended essay where she's talking about reclaiming your unruly beauty, reimagining concepts of beauty and standards, and how you can reclaim what you think of as your beauty. Now, I think there's been a lot of people who have talked on this, but I did really like Emma Dabiri's take. She largely looks at history and how times have changed since then, but she also talks about the hyper-vigilant focus we have on appearance and bodies as we use social media so much these days. As she talks about her younger generation of the younger people now and how they are all over social media and have so many bodies and visuals blasted at them day by day, but also her experience as a Black Irish woman, seeing her body as very different and othered from other people and not fitting into the standard perceptions of beauty then. And at the end she gives you really concrete and straightforward guides on how you can reclaim your beauty and your beauty standards without feeding into capitalism and perceptions and anti-feminist stances while you're trying to navigate reclaiming your beauty, which I think is really valuable. I think what fascinated me most about this was actually the introduction and the first chapter, where she was talking about things at large before getting into a bit more of her personal threads to the story. But it was a really good read. I do think it's something I don't actually give much food for thought, but it's subconsciously something that we're all facing and dealing with every day, and maybe we should be giving it more food for thought if you aren't already. A middle grade book that I absolutely enjoyed and thought was lovely was The Lost Whale by Hannah Gold. This is a middle grade book about a young boy who gets sent to live with his grandmother because his mother needs to be checked into a clinic as she's struggling with depression. And while he's with his grandmother, he becomes fascinated with these whales and learning about them and whale watching, as his mother used to do when she lived back home. And when one of the whales that he's really got an affinity to goes missing, he's going to do everything he possibly can to help this whale get found. Now, Hannah Gold is a treasure of an author. She writes beautiful, lovely stories about animal conservatism and animal rights and care, and that is really threaded through this book. You know, those children who love all of the little fun facts about a certain thing that they're focused on? That's coming through in this. You get a lot of facts about whales, but also things that relate to real life and how whale watching is possible and what you can do to get involved with tracking the whales and the oceans and making it a better place for them. But at the same time, there is this story about this young boy who feels like he didn't do enough for his mother because now his mother needs to be checked in, and now he's apart from his mother, who is seen as his best friend. He's got this longing sense for her. He feels like he's missing her and like he's failed her, and how can he connect to her while she's so far away and is hurting so much. And that is just beautifully conveyed and handled in this book. The artwork in this by Levi Pinfold just exasperates the story all the more and injects even more of that emotional layer to the narrative. It's beautiful, it's just done so very well, and it's one of those books that it's a middle grade one that really hits close to home and to the heart, and I think a lot of young children are going to appreciate reading this. I then read one of those all-age books. So this is Island of Whispers by Frances Hardinge. It's about 150 to 190 pages, so it's not a short fairy tale-esque read, but it is one for all ages, for children but also for adults alike. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. I give this 5 stars, and it became a new favourite. So in this one, we're following Milo. He is the son of the ferryman for the island, and the ferryman's task is to ferry the ghosts and the dead bodies to the place where they can pass over to the next area. But when someone dies and their family members don't want to let them go, it turns out that his father gets hurt in the process, and Milo is the one who has to send these dead people on their way while being pursued by the family member who doesn't want to let the deceased go. It is just so lovely. It's so lovely. Milo never expected to become the ferryman. He's got a brother, so he always thought his brother was going to do it, and because of certain circumstances that you discover in the story, he ends up being the one doing it, and you can just tell that he feels so inadequate and so unconfident in what he's doing while he is still actively doing it, because it's something that just needs to be done for the greater good. And that feeling of inadequacy is something I think a lot of children and also adults can relate to, where you feel like you're not good enough at what you're doing. And I loved that Milo kind of grows in that narrative and finds a new happy balance with that imposter syndrome. And a lot of this is also talking about not doing things in the same way. Things have been done a certain way all the time, but it's okay to put your own spin on it. It's okay to do something differently. I loved that. It also talks about grief in a very realistic depiction way. The hurt that you feel when you don't want to let someone go, the satisfaction you can feel at that moment you do let them go, but also what comes next. I think a lot of grief stories focus on that immediate relief or immediate release of grief emotions, and then after you're done that grieving period, like, what can you do next for people? What can you do next for yourself? This book does take the time to actually touch on that in this story as well, which I think is so lovely. It's got a haunting atmosphere, haunting vibes, with a grim fairy tale-esque narrative to it that I really, really liked. This is also illustrated by Emily Gravett. It's got like cool tones like blues and whites and greys to the illustrations that just complemented the story so very well. It was absolutely lovely, absolutely emotional, but also really meaningful. Very, very good book. We are moving on to Live Like a Goddess by Jean Menzies, and this is her non-fiction self-help book for teenagers, where you can get guides and stories of what you can do for you in your life to live like a goddess. So she goes around the world, I should say. It's quite international in scope, and focuses on all of these different goddesses. You get to be introduced to them, where they're from, one of the stories that's really predominant for them as a goddess, and then following that, some advice or something you can take away from that story that you can apply to your everyday daily life. And I loved this. It does such a good job of blending the mythology that everybody is fascinated by at the moment, but also showing you some goddesses that I had never heard of before, and I was very interested in being introduced to their story and what they're all about. And then I think she did a very good job of showing what you can learn from those goddesses, what you can take from their lives and apply to your own. And I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of teenagers, because there's quite a lot of really good life lessons that people can learn and grow with on their journeys of growing up. But also for me as an adult, there were some really good reminders in here, and I found it really, really valuable. So I do think it does have some elements of being all age, and you should check out my vlog when I read this, because this book is such a beautiful object. Like, the pages have lots of illustrations and bits to them. Look at those end papers. So it's a really gorgeous book as well. I read Red Dust Road by Jackie Kay, and this is Jackie Kay's memoir, who you may know as being a black queer author here in the UK. She is Scottish, but she is also adopted, and in this book she is talking about her experience of being adopted by white parents, what that was like for her, what it was like trying to find and investigate her birth parents. As she's pregnant with her first child, she decides that she wants to find and reconnect with her birth parents. Now, this book, I feel very mixed about it. I did not enjoy the first half as much, but then I enjoyed the second half a lot. I think I was really focusing on this being about her birth parents, what the experience is like, why she was doing it. And while we do get that in the first book, a lot of it isn't that interesting. When she does find her birth parents, she doesn't spend as much time with them as I anticipated for this book to focus on them, and for that to be the driving narrative of this. And it also is told in a bit of an unstructured way, where you bounce to the future where she's meeting her birth parents, and then to her past we can see how she grew up, and then somewhere in the present day when she's pregnant, and it just jumps a little bit in too unstructured a way for my liking. I think it could have worked better if there weren't 3 time strands, but just 2 time strands that it focused on. But it's complicated, because when you get to the second half of this book, that's when it started to do the things that I thought it was going to do. That's when it looks more about her discovering her African heritage, and as she does that, that interested me a lot more. Seeing her go there, seeing her reconnect and discover her culture, and that felt a bit more tangible, and also like she connected more to that journey of discovering her culture than she did of discovering her birth parents. And I think that's where the first half of this book was lacking. It's because I got the vibe that she as an author didn't care about that as much. I do think this book could have been chopped in half and then lost the first half and just given me the second half, and I would have been very, very happy. We have a poetry collection. I read The Magic Border by Arlo Parks, and I feel like I should correct myself. I should have said poetry collection. This is a blend of photography, poetry and song lyrics. So you get all three of those things in this book. Arlo Parks is black and queer, so there's black and queerness as a running theme through a lot of these poems, lyrics and photography. This was a case of me just not really vibing with it as much as I wanted to. I did like the photography elements. I think they were very, very good. More poetry collections with photography included. Yes, please. I didn't particularly read this for the lyrics. I'm more of a poetry reader, and the lyrics just, it didn't work for me. I feel like if I'm going to be reading lyrics, I want to know what the tune is that goes with it, and I didn't for these. So maybe that would be better in an audiobook. I don't know, because I didn't try the audiobook, but the lyrics kind of were a miss for me. And then in terms of the poetry, some of the poetry was really, really nice and I liked it, but also a lot of the poetry felt very personal to the poet, and as someone who doesn't know the poet and doesn't know the context, I couldn't decipher the context from the words I was given alone. So I felt a bit excluded and distant from the poetry, which is not exactly what you want with a poetry collection. Overall, I thought this one was fine, but it just didn't hit it for me. A similar story for The House in the Woods by Yvette. This is a middle grade horror book. I've been struggling with the middle grade horror genre and trying to decipher if it is or isn't for me, and I'm starting to lean on it probably isn't for me. I think this was an interesting book. You're following these three kids who decide to play with an Ouija board in a haunted house, and the ghost follows them home afterwards, and because of that they need to do some paranormal investigations on why the ghost is lingering and what they can help to do to free this ghost. I like that the parents in this one do get involved and are very much in the story too, so it's not just kids going wild by themselves. It felt very realistic in that sense. There is a part where they do some paranormal investigating, and I did like the fact that you got to see some of the widgets and gadgets that they use. I'm a sci-fi reader, so all of that like sciencey element to it was really fun, but it did have a lot of fart jokes, it did have a lot of poop jokes. That's not my favourite type of middle grade. It also felt very straightforward and very like paranormal horror straightforward, which is exactly what this book is, and so I can't fault it for that. I just think it's a case of I am not a middle grade horror reader. I want my stories to be scarier, I want them to creep me out, and for middle grade the level that creeps out a child is just not enough to creep me out as an adult. So this was definitely a case of the book is fine, I'm probably just not a reader of this genre. Another middle grade book that I just found was fine was The House Trap by Emma Reed. So in this one we're following these young children who go into a house that they're supposed to not be in the woods, and the house closes up and locks around them, and they have to solve mysteries in order for the house to release them, and the mysteries they have to solve have something to do with the history of the house. Now when I went into this one I thought it was going to be an escape room kind of story. I did not realise that the solving of the mysteries was going to be so tied into the history of the house, so it disappointed me in that regard, but that's all personal. That was just me wanting more escape room elements where it's kind of a bit more historical mystery, puzzle piecing together situation. That said, I did like that the house closed around them. I did like that there were lightly creepy elements to this. There's some touches of the speculative and supernatural. I liked all of that. I liked the vibe. I liked our main character. She is someone who's quite nerdy. She likes math, she likes science and all of those weird little facts. And she feels a lot of shame because she feels that way. She feels like she's not supposed to be that as a girl, and I liked seeing her kind of grow in confidence of understanding that's who I am, that's what I enjoy, and that's fine. Also at the start of this, the group of children who get kind of locked in, it includes her best friend who she's been drifting away from for a period of time as he's been changing, as he's growing up. And I think that happens a lot to children. Like it's a period where they grow up a lot, they've got to change, they're gonna transform. And so having a book that tackles how do you transform within your friendships as they are changing was really nice to see, and I liked that. I liked the complexities around the friendships that were woven into the plot. Mostly I did like this book, I just didn't fall in love with it the way that I want to when I read something. I think that largely has to be with me just not vibing with the historical elements of this. I wasn't that engaged with them. I feel like it would have been a better book without them, if it was just like mysteries and puzzle pieces that they needed to solve in the escape room setting. And the ending was lovely, it was nice to see, it was satisfactory, it was a good book, it just wasn't one for me in particular. And now we're going to finish by talking about the 2 picture books that I read. So the first one I read was Wolf and Bear by Rolfe, and this is a lovely picture book. I really enjoyed it. It's talking about Bear and Wolf, and Bear kind of struggles with, essentially it's kind of a symbolism for depression, and he starts to submit to the darkness and give in to it. He doesn't want to play with Wolf anymore, he's not interested in doing anything, he just wants to sit and wallow in this darkness. And it's about how Wolf as a friend tries to be there for Bear while he's struggling in that moment, but also like what you can do, what you can't do, the feelings that you can have during this process, how Wolf feels rejected by Bear and validates those emotions while also consistently trying to be a good friend. And I loved it. It was a very sweet story, and I do think it's lovely that you can be talking to children about at such a young age about feelings and about how you can be supportive to friends as they're struggling through those feelings without ever needing to say the word depression. You can still talk about mental health with them at this young age, and it's lovely. The artwork in this is beautiful. The author and illustrator, she does both, has combined 2 different art forms. She talks about it at the end of the book, and it manages to make like a gorgeous effect to the story and added a whole layer to it with the lovely artwork. So that is one I really recommend if you're a parent or gifting to someone who's the picture book age. And then the other picture book I read was The Ogre Who Wasn't by Morpurgo, and this is also illustrated by Emily Gravett. It's described as a classic fairy tale with a modern twist because it's following this young girl whose father seems to not really be around, and she makes friends with a frog who she thinks is an ogre in her shoe, and she is really nice and engaging with all of the nature and the creepy crawlies and the creatures that she finds in her garden, but then the people in the house don't seem as excited as she is with all these creepy crawlies. And it was nice. I just think it wasn't that good of a story, and that was my main issue with it. I think the story was just a bit threaded together a bit randomly, and like it didn't have a follow thread through. I wasn't sure what we were supposed to take away from this book. I wasn't sure what child readers are supposed to take away from this book. The only thing that I did get from it was that you shouldn't be scared of creepy crawlies. They can be lovely, they can be wonderful things. And that was a nice message, but I do think the book was going for more, and I just couldn't figure it out because the story was just a bit unfocused. That said, the artwork in this is also quite nice. It's not my favourite artwork ever, but I do love how the green tones are there with all of the frogs, and it did make for a nice reading experience, but it wasn't my favourite one. And there you have it. Those are all of the books now, really all of the books that I read in the month of November. Please let me know in the comment section down below what is the last thing that you have learned. So I did talk about non-fiction books and how you're learning things every day, but what's something new and refreshing that you have recently learned? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!